The challenge begins. The sound of laughter echoed through the wide studio kitchen as cameras rolled and bright lights glowed against the polished counters. A cheerful host stood between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, their aprons tied tight, their smiles both nervous and playful. It was supposed to be a light-hearted charity cooking challenge. Two beloved stars, decades of friendship, sharing laughs and stories while preparing a dish. No one knew that by the end of it, something much deeper would unfold. Keanu looked calm, but his eyes held a quiet fire. Sandra, ever composed, teased him with a grin as she organized her ingredients with careful precision. The challenge was simple. Cook a dish that represented a memory. No professional chefs, no help from staff, just pure creativity and emotion. The clock was set to 1 hour. As the countdown began, the atmosphere changed. The laughter softened, and both of them moved with a strange kind of focus. Keanu started chopping vegetables, his movements precise yet gentle, as though each cut carried meaning. Sandra mixed her spices, the aroma filling the air with warmth and nostalgia. The host, sensing the sincerity, stepped back. The audience quieted. It no longer felt like entertainment. It felt like witnessing two lives blending through food. After 15 minutes, Sandra glanced toward Keanu. She noticed the small tremor in his hand. He had never been one to show stress, but today, something was different. "You okay there, Chef Reeves?" she said softly, trying to keep it light. He nodded, smiling, but there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes. "Yeah, just remembering something." The host approached, curious. "What are you making, Keanu?" He paused for a moment before answering. "Something my mother used to make. I haven't cooked it since she passed." The words hung in the air like a quiet confession. The crowd grew still. Sandra's hands slowed, her expression softening. She knew what that kind of memory felt like. She looked down at her own ingredients. Fresh basil, lemon, and pasta dough. She smiled faintly and said, "Mine's something my dad taught me before he left for a long trip. I was 12. I never forgot that day." Their eyes met for a moment. Two hearts sharing unspoken stories of loss and memory under the glow of studio lights. As the challenge went on, something shifted. It was no longer about competition. It was about connection. The way Keanu moved, slow and deliberate, spoke of care. The way Sandra smiled as she stirred spoke of peace and gratitude. People watching from the live audience leaned forward, drawn into a space that felt oddly intimate, as if watching two souls remember their pasts while building something new together. But then came the first twist. When the time reached 30 minutes, one of the studio assistants whispered something into the host's ear. The host's face changed slightly, surprise flashing across his eyes. He cleared his throat and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, our producers just added a small surprise twist. Both chefs must now swap a key ingredient from their dishes." The crowd gasped, laughing, but Keanu and Sandra froze. Keanu's key ingredient was a rare type of pepper he brought himself, something deeply connected to his memory of his mother's kitchen. Sandra's was her homemade sauce base, which she'd been preparing with care since the challenge began. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do. A rule was a rule, and the cameras were live. Sandra hesitated, then walked over to his counter. She held out her sauce with a gentle smile. "Here, use this. Maybe it'll make your dish even better." Keanu looked at her, then nodded, offering his peppers in return. "Deal," he said quietly. They both returned to their work, but the energy had changed. Sandra's sauce now blended into Keanu's dish, and his peppers added heat to hers. A symbolic mix neither expected to taste so good. As the final minutes ticked away, the kitchen filled with scents that merged sweet and spicy, soft and sharp. They plated their dishes carefully, their hands steady now, almost synchronized. When the time ran out, the host called out, "Hands up!" and both stood back, breathing deeply. Applause filled the air. They looked at each other and smiled, a wordless acknowledgement of what they'd just shared. The judges came forward to taste. One took a bite of Keanu's dish and paused. "This tastes emotional," she said softly. "Like something you'd make for someone you love." Keanu smiled faintly, eyes down. When they tried Sandra's dish, they were equally moved. Warm, bright, and a little surprising, like the feeling of home, another judge said. The audience clapped, but in that moment, no one cared about scores or winners. It was about something else, how two people, through food and memory, had reminded everyone what it meant to feel human. But just when everything seemed peaceful, the final announcement turned the moment upside down. The host lifted an envelope with a dramatic pause. "We have a winner," he said, smiling. "But before I reveal who it is, there's something both of you should see." The big screen behind them flickered to life. It showed behind-the-scenes footage, unseen moments from their prep time, private conversations caught on camera. The audience murmured as clips rolled. Sandra quietly wiping her eyes while mixing sauce, whispering to herself, "Dad, this one's for you." Keanu staring at a photo tucked inside his apron pocket before starting to cook. But then came something unexpected. In one of the clips, Keanu had stepped outside during a break. He was on the phone, speaking softly. The audio was clear enough for everyone to hear. "Yeah, I'm fine. I promised I'd do this one for her. If it doesn't go right, I'll tell Sandra the truth." The room went silent. Sandra turned to him slowly. Her expression shifted from surprise to confusion. "The truth?" she whispered. Keanu looked pale, caught off guard by the sudden reveal. The cameras zoomed in. The air thickened. The host hesitated, sensing tension but following the show's rhythm. "So before we continue," he said carefully, "Keanu, do you want to share what that means?" Keanu opened his mouth, then stopped. His voice broke slightly when he finally spoke. "I'll tell her," he said quietly, "but not here." "Not like this?" The host nodded, awkwardly shifting to the next moment. "All right, well, the winner of the cooking challenge is—" He paused, looking between them. "It's a tie." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sandra wasn't smiling. She was still watching Keanu, trying to read the emotion in his eyes. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't his usual smile. It was heavy, almost sorrowful. As the show ended and the lights dimmed, they walked off stage together. Sandra asked softly, "What did you mean by that, Keanu?" "What truth?" He looked at her, took a deep breath, and whispered, "It's something I should have told you years ago." The hallway fell silent as the door behind them closed. The truth begins to surface. The hallway outside the studio was quiet, the echo of applause still fading into the distance. Keanu and Sandra walked side by side, both silent, the tension between them soft but unmistakable. The warmth from the studio lights had vanished, replaced by the cool night air that drifted through the open back door. Sandra folded her arms, not in anger but in confusion. She could tell that whatever Keanu was hiding wasn't simple. It felt like the weight of something old. He stopped near the exit, his hands resting on the edge of a metal table. His voice was low. "Do you remember the movie we shot together? Years ago? The one with the long night scenes and the endless coffee?" She smiled faintly. "Of course I do. That was when we barely knew each other but felt like we'd known each other forever." Keanu looked down at the floor, his expression unreadable. "That's where it started," he said softly. "Back then I was struggling with things I didn't know how to talk about. I wasn't sleeping much. I felt lost. My sister was sick and I didn't tell anyone. One night after a long shoot, I got a call. She'd taken a turn for the worse. I drove straight from the set to the hospital." Sandra's eyes softened. She hadn't known this part of his past. "Keanu," she said gently, "I had no idea." "I didn't want anyone to know," he continued, his tone steady but thick with emotion. "But here's what I never told you. That night, before I left, you said something to me. You said, well, whatever you're going through, don't face it alone. And I never forgot that. I carried it for years." Sandra stepped closer, her voice warm but cautious. "So what does that have to do with tonight?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Tonight wasn't just a charity challenge for me," he said. "This dish. It wasn't just for my mother. It was for you, too." She blinked, confused. "For me?" He nodded slowly. "After that film ended, I wrote you a letter. I never sent it. I told myself it was better to stay quiet. You had your life, your projects, your happiness. But after what happened with my sister, I realized that some people enter your life to remind you what home feels like. You were that for me. And tonight, cooking that dish, it brought back everything I never said. The air hung heavy between them, filled with the quiet pulse of truth and vulnerability. Sandra looked away for a moment, her eyes glistening under the dim hallway light. "You wrote me a letter?" she said quietly. "And never sent it?" He nodded. "I still have it." Sandra took a deep breath, her emotions shifting between warmth and ache. "Why didn't you tell me before? All these years, we've been friends, working, laughing, surviving everything together, and you kept that locked away?" "Because," he said gently, "I didn't want it to change what we had. I didn't want to risk something that already meant more than I could explain." Sandra closed her eyes for a second, feeling her heart tighten. She remembered their long calls, their quiet moments between scenes, the silent comfort they always shared. It had always felt like something deeper was there, but neither of them ever crossed that invisible line. She smiled sadly. "You really are impossible, Keanu Reeves," she said softly. "You hide the most honest parts of yourself under all that calm." He chuckled faintly, but his eyes stayed serious. "And you read people too well, Sandra Bullock." For a long moment, they stood in silence, listening to the sound of distant traffic outside the studio. It was a moment of peace, but also uncertainty. Something unspoken still lingered between them. Just then, a studio assistant walked up to them. "Sorry to interrupt," she said nervously, "but the producers want to film a short post-show interview before you both leave. They said it's just a few minutes." Sandra looked at Keanu, then nodded. "Sure, let's finish this properly." As they walked back inside, the cameras were already set up. The host smiled, trying to keep things light. "We're back with our stars, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. That was one of the most heartfelt challenges we've ever seen. How do you both feel now that it's over?" Sandra smiled softly. It felt personal. "I think we both went into it for reasons beyond the competition," Keanu added. "Sometimes, when you cook something that reminds you of someone you love, you remember not just the recipe, but who you were with them. That's what today was for me," the host nodded, moved. "That's beautiful. And we heard there might be a deeper story behind it. Something you plan to share?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe someday, but not today." After the interview, as the cameras shut off, Sandra looked at him again. "That letter," she said softly. "I want to read it." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I think," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's time." Later that night, Sandra sat alone in her car outside the hotel. Rain began to fall, tracing slow patterns down the windshield. She thought about the challenge, the food, the laughter, the confession. She felt something shift inside her. A quiet realization that perhaps life had given her another chance to understand someone who'd always been there, quietly holding her story in his own. A soft knock on her car window broke the silence. She looked up. It was Keanu, holding a small envelope. He opened the door slightly and said, "I never thought I'd give this to you, but you asked." She took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then stepped back into the rain, walking slowly toward the parking lot. Inside the car, Sandra looked at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The paper inside was slightly worn, the ink faint but legible. She began to read. "Dear Sandra, if I ever have the courage to give you this, it means I've stopped hiding behind silence. I don't know how to define what we have. Maybe it's friendship. Maybe it's something deeper that neither of us ever needed to name. But I do know this. Your kindness has been one of the few things that ever made me feel safe in this world. You once told me that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. You've been that presence in my life quietly and completely." Her eyes blurred as she read the next lines. "If I never say this out loud, just know that I'm grateful. Not for what we could be, but for what we already are. And maybe that's enough." Sandra folded the letter carefully and held it close to her chest. The rain outside softened, turning into a slow rhythm against the glass. She whispered, "You have no idea what that means to me." But just as she started the engine to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the studio producer. "We need both of you back tomorrow morning. There's something urgent about the footage. Call me as soon as you can." Her heart sank. Something about the tone didn't feel right. She glanced once more at the letter in her hand and whispered, "What now?" The lost footage the next morning, the city was still half asleep when Sandra arrived at the studio. The sky was pale blue, washed with a thin layer of fog, and the air carried that quiet stillness only found before sunrise. She parked her car near the back entrance, clutching a coffee cup and the letter Keanu had given her. She hadn't slept much. Her mind had replayed every word of it, the honesty, the simplicity, the quiet ache hidden between the lines. When she stepped inside, the studio was dimly lit, a few technicians already moving around. The atmosphere was strange, tense, uncertain. One of the producers, a woman named Claire, hurried over the moment she saw Sandra. "Thank you for coming so early," she said quietly. "We're waiting for Keanu too. There's a situation." Sandra frowned, setting her cup aside. "What kind of situation?" Claire hesitated, her voice dropping lower. "Last night after we wrapped up, some of the backup drives went missing. One of them had your behind-the-scenes clips, including the private footage from the break, the part with Keanu's call." Sandra froze. "The one that aired accidentally?" Claire nodded. "Yes. Apparently someone leaked an extended version online around midnight. It's spreading fast. People are speculating about what he meant. The words 'I'll tell Sandra the truth' are everywhere." Sandra's heartbeat quickened. "You're saying it's viral?" "Trending #3 globally," Claire said softly. "And the comments, they're wild. Everyone's trying to guess what the truth is. Some think it's romantic. Others are twisting it into something else entirely." Before Sandra could respond, the sound of a door opening echoed down the hall. Keanu walked in, wearing a black hoodie and jeans, his eyes tired but calm. He looked like someone who had spent the night thinking, not sleeping. When he saw Sandra, he gave a small nod. "You've seen it?" she asked gently. He sighed. "Yeah, I woke up to 1,000 messages. My agent's losing his mind." Claire stepped in carefully. "We've contacted the platform. They're trying to contain it, but it's already being uploaded. Someone from the editing team probably copied the footage." Keanu nodded slowly. "So it's out of our hands." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the situation settled between them, the loss of privacy, the misunderstanding waiting to grow. Sandra could see the quiet hurt in Keanu's face. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. He had trusted that moment to stay personal. Finally, Sandra said softly, "Then we'll tell our own story." Keanu looked up. "What do you mean?" "If people are already guessing," she said, "let's give them the truth, the real version, not the noise. We can record a short interview together. Not for drama, but for clarity. I think people deserve to see the heart behind it." He smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "You always find a way to turn chaos into calm." "Someone has to," she said with a small grin. "And besides, if they're going to talk about us, they might as well hear it from us." The producer nodded. "If you both agree, we can set up a quiet segment today. No audience, no crowd, just a clean sit-down." Keanu and Sandra exchanged a look, the kind of wordless understanding that had always existed between them. Within an hour, the studio lights were ready. The set was simple, 2 chairs facing each other, a soft gray backdrop and 1 camera. No scripts, no rehearsals, just honesty. As the camera rolled, Sandra began. Her tone was steady, warm. "So the internet thinks you were keeping a big secret from me," she said, half smiling. "Want to tell them what's really going on?" Keanu chuckled quietly. "Well, the truth isn't that dramatic. It's just real. I was making a dish that reminded me of my mother. But that call, the one people heard, was about something I've carried for a long time. A letter I wrote to Sandra years ago but never gave her. It wasn't a secret. It was just something personal that I wasn't ready to share." Sandra nodded, her expression gentle. "And now you have. I read it last night, and for everyone wondering, no, it wasn't a confession, it was gratitude. It was honesty." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe a little confession too," he said softly. The audience at home would never know if he was joking or not, but Sandra did. She smiled back, a quiet spark passing between them. The recording lasted only 10 minutes, but it felt sincere and healing. By the time they finished, even the crew stood silent. No one wanted to break the stillness that followed their words. Afterward, as the cameras powered down, Sandra said quietly, "That was brave of you." He shrugged. "It felt right. Hiding never really worked anyway." She nodded. "Still, people might twist it." "They always do," he said. "But the ones who matter will understand." As they walked out of the studio, the morning light spilled across the floor, soft, golden, and peaceful. But just as they reached the exit, Claire rushed toward them, holding her phone. Her face was pale. "You both need to see this," she said, handing the phone to Sandra. On the screen was a clip, not from the interview they had just filmed, but from an unseen recording. It showed Keanu alone in the studio kitchen after the show, staring at Sandra's empty counter. His voice was low, raw, as if he didn't know he was being recorded. "I wish she knew," he said quietly. "It wasn't just gratitude. It never was." The video ended there. The clip had been uploaded by an anonymous account with the caption, "Keanu Reeves finally admits it." Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, eyes wide. "Did you know about this?" He shook his head slowly. "No, I didn't even remember saying that." The world outside the studio seemed to fade. The sound of cars, footsteps, voices, everything blurred. Sandra felt a mix of shock and tenderness, confusion and clarity. That one line changed everything. For years, she had wondered if what they shared was friendship or something deeper hidden behind their restraint. Now she didn't know what to believe. Keanu took a step closer. "Whatever people think," he said quietly, "that clip wasn't meant for them, but the words are still true." Her heart skipped. "You mean?" "Yeah," he said softly. "It wasn't just gratitude." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of something electric, something unspoken yet undeniable. Before either of them could say more, Claire's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it and looked up, her expression tense. "The studio wants both of you to attend a press conference tomorrow morning. They want to clear the air publicly. They say the media storm is growing fast." Keanu sighed quietly. "A press conference," he murmured. "Perfect timing." Sandra looked at him, her eyes steady but uncertain. "Are you ready for the world to hear it all?" He met her gaze, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. "I think the world's already listening." The press conference the next morning, the studio grounds looked different. Cameras lined the walkway, reporters gathered behind metal barriers, and flashes blinked like lightning against the gray sky. What had started as a small cooking challenge had turned into a global story overnight. Social media was flooded with clips, theories, and endless debates. Were they in love? Was it all staged? Had Keanu finally confessed something real? Sandra arrived first, her hair tied neatly, wearing a calm expression that masked the whirlwind inside her. She had spent the entire night reading messages from friends, journalists, even strangers, all asking the same question. But the only person she wanted to hear from was Keanu. He arrived quietly, as he always did, dressed in a black suit without any attempt at showmanship. He walked through the chaos with his usual grace, calm eyes, slow steps, a faint nod to the photographers. When he reached Sandra, he smiled softly. "Ready?" she exhaled slowly. "Not really, but I guess we don't have a choice." They entered the main hall together. The studio had arranged the press conference in a wide auditorium filled with journalists, cameras, and a few fans who had somehow been allowed in. Bright lights washed the stage, where 2 seats waited for them beside a small podium. The producer, Claire, stood off to the side, giving them a reassuring nod. "Just be yourselves," she whispered. "That's all people want to see." As they took their seats, the noise in the room settled. The host from the cooking show stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "We appreciate your patience. As you all know, last week's charity challenge featuring Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock captured the hearts of millions, but it also sparked a wave of speculation. Today, they're here to speak openly." He gestured toward them. "Sandra, Keanu, the floor is yours." Sandra leaned toward the microphone first, her tone calm but sincere. "Thank you. I know the last few days have been intense. What started as a simple event for charity has turned into something much bigger than either of us expected. We've seen the headlines, the edits, the assumptions, and we wanted to clear things up in our own words." She paused, glancing at Keanu. His expression encouraged her to continue. "The truth is, we've known each other for a very long time. We've shared good days, hard days, laughter, and silence. What happened during that challenge wasn't scripted or planned. It was real. We both cooked from a place of memory, from loss, love, and gratitude. That's what people felt." A wave of camera shutters filled the room. The crowd leaned closer, drawn by her sincerity. Then Keanu spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "The leaked clips, they weren't meant for the public. I said some things that came from a private moment. I wish it had stayed private, but since it didn't, the least I can do is be honest about it." He looked directly at the audience, his tone quiet but clear. "When I said it wasn't just gratitude, I meant that my connection with Sandra has always gone beyond friendship, but not in the way people are turning it into. It's not about romance or headlines, it's about respect. It's about how rare it is to meet someone who changes how you see the world. She's been that person for me." The room fell silent for a moment. Even the reporters, trained to chase drama, seemed moved by his words. Sandra's eyes softened. "And for me," she added, "he's been the person who reminds me what kindness looks like when no one's watching. That's not something you explain to the media, it's something you feel." The host smiled faintly. So, he said, to clarify, there's no romantic relationship. Keanu and Sandra exchanged a glance and both smiled, that quiet, knowing smile only they shared. Keanu replied, labels make things smaller. What we have doesn't need one. A ripple of laughter and murmurs filled the room, but it wasn't mocking. It was genuine, people understood. But then, as the questions continued, a journalist stood up near the back, holding a tablet. Mr. Reeves, he said sharply, are you aware that a second clip surfaced this morning? In this one, someone filmed you leaving the studio last night with a small envelope in your hand. Some fans believe you gave Sandra a ring. Gasps scattered across the room. Sandra's eyebrows lifted in surprise. She hadn't heard this. She turned to Keanu, her eyes searching. He looked momentarily stunned, then chuckled softly. No, it wasn't a ring, he said calmly. It was a note, something from the show that I wanted her to have. The reporter pressed. So no engagement, he shook his head. No engagement, no staged drama, just a note and maybe a few too many cameras. The tension eased again, laughter returning. But Sandra's mind was elsewhere. She realized what note he was talking about, the second one he had slipped into her hand that morning before they walked onto the stage. She hadn't opened it yet. After the conference, as they stepped outside into the buzzing crowd, Keanu leaned close and whispered, "You should read that when you're alone." She nodded slowly. "What's in it?" He smiled faintly. "Just something I didn't get to say in there." They parted ways soon after. The reporters followed Keanu to his car, while Sandra slipped into hers, exhausted yet curious. Once she was safely parked a few blocks away, she opened the small envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, written in his careful handwriting. Dear Sandra, I meant every word I said today. But there's something I didn't say because some truths belong to quiet places, not microphones. When I said you changed how I see the world, I meant you reminded me what it means to feel safe with someone again. I didn't think I'd ever have that after everything. You gave it back to me without asking for anything in return. Maybe the world will call it friendship, maybe something else. But whatever they call it, for me, it's home. Her eyes filled with tears. She smiled through them, whispering, You always say the right thing when no one's listening. She folded the letter and kept it close to her heart. But before she could start the car, her phone buzzed again, a message from Claire. You need to come back to the studio, immediately. It's urgent. Something happened to Keanu. The words hit her like a shock of cold water. Her pulse raced. Without hesitation, she started the engine and sped back toward the studio, her thoughts spinning. Was it the crowd, an accident, or something else entirely? As she reached the lot, flashing lights reflected off the glass doors. Security guards stood in confusion, staff huddled together, whispering. Sandra jumped out of her car and ran toward them, her heart pounding. What happened? She demanded. Claire met her halfway, her face pale. He collapsed after the conference, she said, trembling slightly. Paramedics just took him to the hospital. Sandra's world went still. The sound of the crowd faded, the lights dimmed, everything else disappeared except that single sentence echoing in her head. Without another word, she turned and ran toward her car again. She didn't care about cameras, questions, or headlines. All she could think was, not again. The silent room, the hospital corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. Sandra's shoes clicked against the cold floor as she hurried down the hallway, her heart racing faster than her breath could keep up. Flashes from paparazzi cameras outside still burned behind her eyes, but in here, everything was silent, too silent. A nurse recognized her immediately. Miss Bullock. He's in room 12, she said softly, guiding her toward a private wing. He's stable for now, but he fainted due to exhaustion and low blood sugar. The doctors are running a few more tests. Sandra nodded, barely hearing the rest. Her mind was tangled with memories. The laughter from the cooking challenge, his calm voice during the press conference, the note she still carried in her pocket. She couldn't believe that in less than 24 hours, the world had gone from smiling at them to holding its breath. When she entered room 12, her steps slowed. Keanu lay on the bed, pale but peaceful, his eyes closed. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, steady but fragile. A soft light from the window brushed against his face, highlighting the lines of someone who had carried too much weight for too long. She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, her hands trembling slightly. You scared everyone, she whispered, her voice breaking the still air. You can't just collapse in front of millions and expect me to stay calm. She smiled faintly through the tears that were already forming. You'd probably tell me not to worry, you always do, but this time I think I've earned the right to worry. After a few minutes, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded note he had given her at the press conference. the one that ended with, "For me, it's home." She read it again slowly, the words taking on new weight now that he was lying there, silent and still. She reached out and gently held his hand. "You called me home," she whispered, her thumb brushing across his fingers. "You have no idea how much that means." A nurse entered quietly, checking the monitor and adjusting in Roman 4 line. Sandra looked up. "Will he be okay?" The nurse nodded reassuringly. "He's just exhausted, too much stress, not enough rest. He'll wake up soon." Sandra exhaled slowly, relief flooding her chest. When the nurse left, she stayed seated, her eyes never leaving him. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, echoing through the city. Hours passed. The rain began to fall again, soft and rhythmic against the window. She lost track of time until she finally felt his hand move. She sat up instantly. His fingers twitched, then his eyes opened, slow, disoriented, but calm as always. When he saw her, a faint smile touched his lips. "Hey," he whispered. "Hey yourself," she said softly, leaning closer. "You really know how to make an exit, don't you?" He chuckled weakly. "Guess I needed a dramatic ending to the day." She shook her head, half smiling, half crying. "You terrified everyone. The producers thought you'd collapsed because of the pressure." He turned his head slightly, looking at her. "Pressure had nothing to do with it. I just hadn't eaten since yesterday. And maybe I was running on too many thoughts." "Thoughts," she repeated softly. "Like what?" He hesitated, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "Like how fast things can change. One week you're cooking pasta for charity, and the next you're a headline about something you never meant to expose." She nodded slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong, you were honest. People felt that, maybe too deeply." He smiled faintly. "You handled it better than I did." "That's not true," she said gently. "I just smiled more while panicking inside." They both laughed quietly, a small, tired laugh that carried warmth through the cold hospital air. After a long pause, Sandra said softly, "Keanu, when I read your note, I realized something. For years, we've been so careful with each other. Always respectful, always kind, but never open about what we really mean. You said I was home for you, and I think you've been that for me too." His eyes met hers, quiet, steady, searching. "You mean that?" "I do," she said. "It's not about labels. It's not about what people think we are. It's about how we feel when we're together, calm, safe, seen. That's rare." His eyes softened, and he whispered, "Then maybe we stop hiding behind friendship." She smiled, a tear escaping down her cheek. "Maybe we stop hiding, period." A silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was full of something gentle and unspoken, a mutual understanding that didn't need to be explained. Just then, the door opened slightly. Claire stepped in hesitant. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly. "The studio wants to know if you'll both still appear tomorrow night for the charity gala. It's optional, but it could help calm the media storm." Sandra looked at Keanu, then back at Claire. "If he's okay, we'll be there." Keanu nodded slowly. "I'll be fine, we'll go." After Claire left, he looked at Sandra again. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, "let's do it differently. No cameras, no scripts, just us." She smiled. Deal. The next evening arrived faster than either of them expected. The gala was held in a grand hall lit with chandeliers, elegant but warm. It was meant to honor the charity the cooking challenge had supported, a fund for families rebuilding after loss. When they entered together, hand in hand, the room fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. Not the loud, chaotic kind that chased drama, but the genuine kind, people relieved to see them smiling again. They greeted guests, posed for a few respectful photos, and spoke briefly on stage. Sandra took the microphone first. "Sometimes," she said softly, "life reminds you that connection is the most powerful thing we can share. This week we learned that even when stories get twisted, truth finds its way back." Then Keanu stepped forward. "And sometimes," he added, "the best things we can do for each other are simple: show up, listen, and stay." The crowd clapped warmly. Sandra looked at him with quiet pride. He looked back at her with gratitude that said more than words could. After the speeches, they stepped outside to the terrace, away from the noise. The night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered below. "You did great in there," she said softly. He smiled. "So did you." They stood side by side for a while, watching the skyline. Then he said quietly, "You know, I think this whole storm, the leaks, the press, the exhaustion, maybe it all happened for a reason." "What reason?" she asked. "So that I'd finally stop being afraid to tell you what you already knew," he said softly. "That you're more than a chapter in my life, you're the whole story." Her eyes glistened, and she whispered, "Then maybe it's time we write it properly." He turned to her, smiling that gentle, honest smile she had known for decades. Together," she said. But before they could speak again, a man in a suit approached from behind. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock, sorry to interrupt. We've just been informed that a tabloid is releasing something tonight. They claim to have more footage from the studio, something that wasn't supposed to exist." Keanu frowned. "What footage?" "They didn't say," the man replied. "Only that it changes everything." The words hung in the air like a chill wind. Sandra's eyes met Keanu's, calm but uncertain. "We can't go through another storm," she whispered. He took her hand gently. "Then we face it together this time. No hiding." The city lights flickered below them. The wind carried the faint sound of music from the gala inside. But in that quiet moment, standing side by side beneath the night sky, both of them knew the real twist was still coming. The twist that changed everything the following morning. Sunlight spilled softly through Sandra's curtains, but her heart was anything but calm. She hadn't slept much. The world outside her window had erupted again, headlines everywhere, whispers of new footage, speculation spiraling faster than truth could travel. She turned on her phone and scrolled through the notifications. Every major outlet carried the same headline. "Leaked final recording from Keanu and Sandra's show, truth revealed." Her pulse quickened as she tapped one of the videos. It began with the familiar kitchen from the cooking challenge, the warm lights and laughter. But this time, it wasn't the live footage. It was a camera angle from behind the set, something no one had ever seen. In the clip after the show ended and the lights dimmed, Keanu was seen standing alone at the counter, staring at the 2 plates they had made. He looked lost in thought, unaware that anyone was still filming. His voice came through, soft but heavy. This wasn't about winning or cooking, it was about her. It always was. He placed his hand on the counter, breathing deeply. "I spent years thinking I could just keep it hidden, that the respect I have for her was enough, but it's not just respect anymore, it's everything, she's everything." The video ended abruptly. The screen went black. Sandra sat frozen, her hand covering her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, not because the world had heard his words, but because those words weren't meant for the world at all. They were meant for silence, for honesty, for her. Her phone buzzed again. Claire's name appeared on the screen. "I saw it," Sandra said before Claire could speak. "Is he okay?" Claire sighed. "He's at the studio. The press is already waiting outside. He hasn't spoken to anyone yet. I think he's waiting for you." Without hesitation, Sandra grabbed her coat and left. The drive to the studio felt endless. The city blurred past flashes of cameras, billboards with their faces, endless voices chasing something they could never fully understand. When she finally arrived, the security team cleared a path for her. Inside, Keanu sat on a bench in the hallway, a cup of untouched coffee beside him. He looked tired, like someone carrying too much truth in too little space. When he saw her, he stood immediately. "I didn't know that camera was still on," he said quietly. "I never meant for that to go public." She stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. "You didn't do anything wrong, you told the truth." "Yeah," he said with a faint smile, "but maybe too late." She shook her head. "No, Keanu. Maybe exactly when the world needed to hear it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise from outside, reporters shouting, phones ringing, all faded into a distant hum. It felt like the rest of the world had paused, waiting for them to decide what came next. Finally, Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out the letter he had written, the first one, the one that started everything. She unfolded it slowly and held it between them. "You once wrote," she said softly, "maybe what we have is enough. But it isn't, not anymore." He looked at her, his eyes uncertain. "What do you mean?" "I mean that life's too short to keep beautiful things half hidden," she said. "You've spent your whole life giving peace to others and silence to yourself. Maybe it's time you let yourself be happy out loud." Keanu smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both relief and disbelief. "And what if happiness scares me more than silence?" "Then," she said gently, "I'll be right there when it does." The words lingered between them like light breaking through fog. He reached for her hand, slow and careful, as if afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. Their fingers met, not as actors, not as friends performing for cameras, but as 2 people finally choosing truth over fear. A soft knock interrupted them. Claire peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt," she said quietly. "The studio's asking if you both want to release an official statement, or you can speak live." "It's up to you." Keanu glanced at Sandra, then back at Claire. "No statements," he said. "No press," Sandra nodded. "We'll speak for ourselves." They stepped outside together. Hundreds of reporters filled the courtyard, lights flashing, microphones extending toward them like a storm of questions. But for the first time in days, neither of them looked anxious. Keanu took a step forward, his hand still in Sandra's. He spoke calmly, his voice clear. What's out there is real. Those were my words. They came from a place of honesty, not performance. I've always admired Sandra. Not for who she is on camera, but for who she is when no one's watching. Sandra squeezed his hand gently and added, We never planned any of this. Sometimes the best things in life happen when you stop planning. What we share is built on years of trust, laughter, and quiet care, and no matter how loud the world gets, that won't change. The crowd went silent for a moment. Then, instead of the usual shouting, someone in the back began to clap. One by one, others joined in a slow, genuine applause that filled the air with something rare in moments like this: respect. Keanu turned to her, smiling softly. I guess that's our ending, he whispered. She smiled back. No, Keanu, she said gently. This is the beginning. Months passed after that day. The noise slowly faded. Interviews came and went, headlines changed, and the world moved on to new stories. But theirs remained, quiet, steady, private. Sometimes they cooked together at his home, not for cameras, not for fans, just for each other. The same recipe that had started it all became their small ritual. One night, as they sat across from each other, the scent of basil and pepper filling the air, Sandra laughed softly. You know, she said, if someone had told me a cooking challenge would change everything, I would have laughed. Keanu smiled. You wouldn't have believed them. No, she said, looking at him warmly. But I'm glad it did. He reached across the table and took her hand again, the same way he had that day in the hallway after the first show. The same calm, deliberate gesture that spoke louder than 1,000 headlines. To truth, he said softly. She nodded, her eyes shining. To home. And as the night settled around them, quiet and golden, the two of them realized that the real twist wasn't in the footage, or the headlines, or the chaos the world saw. It was in the simple fact that after all these years, they had finally chosen to stop hiding. Their story had begun as a challenge. It ended as something far deeper, two souls finding peace not in grand declarations, but in gentle truth. And for the first time in years, both of them finally felt what they had been searching for all along. Home,